Several people looking for it. Yeah. When you get a chance, I like to take that one and listen to that one.
It's good enough. I just didn't want to walk it through.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Well, I
I was
put that on
wondering,
the list
if
of
somebody
needed
that pops up
pointer for
on
next year.
Facebook or something, say, you know, but I didn't.
A stronger pointer.
Thanks, that'd be great.
Oh, it's already live. Well, welcome everybody to the presentation today given by Chik-Wauk. He's in Meteorology of the 1999 Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Windstorm and the Derecho wind that we had. Some of you might have been up here during that time frame and remember that very well. But Jim's going to kind of give us a background on what actually happened. Some of us just know it was a straight line winds, it was a Derecho wind, but he's here to tell us more technical terms on what exactly happened. So thank you again very much for joining us here at Chik-Wauk Museum and Nature Center. Donations are always appreciative that are at the back end. We have a little donation jar. And we are still looking for volunteers. If you have some time this fall and would like to come up and volunteer here at Chik-Wauk Museum or Nature Center, just let us know after the presentation. Thank you all for coming. And again, here's Chik-Wauk.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
What?
All right. Good. I'll use the pointer. First of all, how many people were up here? If I could have a show of hands, how many people were here for the 99 blowdown? Okay, great. After the talk, I would love to ask you to relate your experience because it was really a remarkable event. So, what I'm going to talk about today, obviously, is the blowdown, give you an overview. I'm going to talk more about the meteorology of the event, kind of what led up to it, its complete. Want me a little closer? This is testing. How's that? Testing. There. Okay, great. As my wife will attest, I'm usually don't have problems being heard. So we're going to talk a little bit about the meteorology. We're going to talk about the sequence of events, especially through the blowdown phase here. And then we're going to talk more generally about some of the surprise aspects of this derecho that you may not be aware of. So if we move right along, of course, the first question is, what is a derecho? And how is it different from thunderstorms and other meteorological phenomena? The term derecho has not been in common use for all that long. It was really just defined by meteorologists in the late 1980s. And it has only come into more common usage in the last 10 years or so. Of course, everything starts with thunderstorms, which we're all familiar with. Those of us who were here on Thursday night saw a really good example of pretty intense thunderstorms come through here, not nearly as intense as they were down in the Twin Cities and into Wisconsin. But typically thunderstorms are relatively small meteorologically, 1 to 5 miles in diameter for an individual cell. Sometimes they form into lines. We call those multi-cell lines. Those can be maybe 50 miles long. they're typically not associated with severe weather. Severe weather would be, how's that? Even better. Okay. Severe weather is defined as wind speeds in excess of 55 miles an hour, hail 3/4 of an inch in diameter or larger, and can also be, of course, include tornadoes and other very destructive phenomena. But a typical garden variety thunderstorm is something we're all familiar with. Going to the next slide. Sometimes these systems evolve into things that are more, that are larger and better organized than an individual thunderstorm. The mesoscale convective system, like we're seeing this is a satellite image that you're looking at here, where the red temperatures is. The red is the coldest cloud tops, but you can see this is a much larger system. Typically, it might be the size of, it might be 200 to 300 miles wide. It would have many thunderstorms contained within it in a large mass. What the difference between an individual thunderstorm and a mesoscale convective complex is that the storms develop quickly enough and get large enough that they actually begin to develop their own circulation. They influence the atmosphere around them and begin to create their own lifting motion. They draw humid air in and they organize themselves into this bigger system. These can travel for hundreds of miles, and they'll persist for up to 18 hours sometimes. Typically, for us here in Minnesota, we would see these systems would typically develop out in the high plains, out in the Dakotas, and then drift across Minnesota under the right atmospheric conditions. They can have severe weather associated with them, with some of the more intense thunderstorm cells within that MCS, but the wind damage is typically less than a few miles, certainly less than 50 miles. The sustained wind speeds can get upwards of 70 miles an hour for brief periods, but it's not typically a strong wind event. Sometimes there's tornadoes and other severe weather associated with some of these storms. Again, relatively short-lived. The derecho is a very special evolution of an MCS into this highly organized system. And it occurs when that MCS evolves into a self-perpetuating straight-line wind system. By definition, a derecho will have a path of strong winds that's 250 miles long at a minimum. And many of these are much larger events, much longer events. With sustained winds, not wind gusts, but sustained winds of over 60 miles an hour, and wind gusts that could be upwards of 75 to well over 100 miles an hour. Now I'm going to be using, as we go through the talk, I'm going to be talking about wind speeds, both sustained winds and wind gust speed. So I think I should probably define those a little bit. Sustained winds are winds, in meteorology, it's a 2-minute average wind speed. So for the typical wind would be measured by an anemometer. It's the average wind speed over 2 minutes. The wind gust, of course, I think we're all familiar with, could be the peak wind within that 2 minutes, or it's just a very short phenomenon, very short duration wind gust at a much higher speed. And of course we get wind gusts in all kinds of conditions. They aren't just associated with thunderstorms or with severe weather. But in a derecho, the sustained winds are over 60 miles an hour. Now, in a typical thunderstorm, you'll get wind gusts that can be upwards of 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. But those are gusts. They're very brief in duration, and then the winds dive back down to something much lower than that. The derecho is unique because it has this sustained winds at extremely high speed. 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour is a hurricane. That's a sustained wind speeds of over 75 miles an hour. So these are very high winds, and then the wind gusts that get added in on top of that can almost double that speed. So they're incredibly destructive. And the other unique feature of these is that they are what we call straight line winds. The winds are all blowing in one direction. Again, in a typical thunderstorm, you can get what are called microbursts, which is an area of rapidly moving wind that descends in the downdraft, hits the ground, and spreads out, and you'll get a fan-shaped pattern of wind that will spread out away from that. That's the microbursts create the wind shear events that aircraft are quite susceptible to. A straight line wind is a sustained wind that creates these winds in a straight line. You can see the tree pattern here. All the trees blowing down in the same direction, and that goes on for tens of miles, hundreds of miles. So let's talk about the initiation of the 1999 derecho. This is July 4th, holiday weekend. The meteorological setup here was that we had MCS that had developed over South Dakota and then drifted into southeastern North Dakota over the evening hours of July 3rd into July 4th. We've got a number of features here that I'm not going to define all the meteorology for you. I'll spare you that. But the key things, the key elements that set up this storm were that we had a very large pocket of the green area here. This is the 65-degree dew point area at 5,000 feet above the surface. So this would have corresponded to 70 to 75-degree dew points. It's very humid and uncomfortable there at the surface. But even up at 5,000 feet above the surface, you had extremely warm, moist air. That's the fuel. Just like fire needs wood for fuel, the atmosphere for thunderstorms needs fuel. It needs this moisture. Because as it gets, if something comes along to lift that, and it gets into much colder, drier air aloft, the thunderstorms will explode in development. And what we had in this case, up at 18,000 to 20,000 feet, we had very cold air. Minus 10 degrees C, that's 14 above Fahrenheit. So you went from 70 degrees above at 5,000 feet, and then just 12,000 feet, another 12,000 feet, the air is 14 degrees, well below freezing. That creates tremendous instability. And then the last key point here is this MCS was located right in here, and as it's drifting, there's what we call a 500 millibar shortwave. Shortwave is meteorological shorthand for an upper air disturbance. You've heard this called. It's just a little twist in the atmosphere in the upper levels that would serve as the trigger for the derecho event. So this is the setup. This is 7 a.m. on the morning of July 4th, 1999. As that shortwave interacted with that MCS, we had a sudden and extremely rapid intensification of that MCS, and it evolved into a squall line in 20 minutes. It went from this relatively unorganized group of thunderstorms into a well-defined squall line. Now this is an example of another squall line. If you look carefully, you'll see that this is in Kentucky, not in Minnesota. I didn't have a radar picture for the early evolution of this storm out in North Dakota. But it would have looked something like that. One solid line beginning to bow out, beginning to get a curve in the line. The amazing thing is how quickly this happened and how quickly this accelerated. That whole MCS had drifted from South Dakota into North Dakota at a speed of about 20 miles an hour over the course of the evening. And suddenly, between 7 and 8 o'clock, it accelerated to over 50 miles an hour And by 7:30, it hit the West Fargo, the Fargo airport out west of Fargo, North Dakota, with 60 to 70 mile an hour winds, knocked power out to over 40,000 people. Yeah, question?
This is the morning, 7:30.
This is 7:30 in the morning of July 4th. So, when these things come together, you know, the explosive development is really remarkable. It's one of the remarkable features about this storm in particular. It didn't evolve over several hours. All the elements came together at once, and it developed into this derecho, the onset of this derecho, within a half hour, and started causing damage. Then I split this into a number of phases as the derecho then evolved over the morning hours. So in the morning hours in phase 1, this bow echo that we saw, this is the dotted lines here are the outline of the front leading edge on radar of that bow echo, which would have been the leading edge of the strong winds. And these times are in Greenwich time. So this 1500 is really 10 a.m., 10:30, 11. So you can see that this map is showing the progress of that bow echo through 1:30 in the afternoon, through about 2 o'clock when we finally exited northern Minnesota. And the wind damage, the W's are the wind damage. You can read the key up here. There's a tornado that was dropped out in western Minnesota. The key thing is that when this storm first developed, it was a single line, a single bow echo. But it quickly organized, it seemed to split its energy into 2 pieces. One piece, the southern piece, sort of separated from the main line of the storm and went straight east up to just north of Duluth, between Duluth and 2 harbors, before it finally dissipated and fell apart. It did develop some winds of over 60 miles an hour, widespread minor damage, but really nothing spectacular. It was the northern portion that remained strong, reached Bemidji, which is going to be out here about 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Report of 75 mile an hour winds, 1 inch hail. By the time it got to Hibbing, the Hibbing-Chisholm Airport up here, at about 11 o'clock, 11:30, the winds were 80 miles an hour. And this became the main focus of the derecho as it continued to move and accelerate. And you can see that the bow echo, as the storm splits, the bow echo begins to fall apart here, and then it reforms within the next hour into a clearly defined bow echo. And I'll show you a radar replay of what this looked like. But it's producing these strong winds and severe weather all the way across from North Dakota as it's coming across. But the wind speeds are between 60 and 80 miles an hour. We'll go to the next slide. As we get to the second phase, we're at 11 a.m. now, and the storm starts to intensify, the northern portion of the storm. And the gray area here is the area of almost total forest destruction. Virtually everything, all the trees that we could see, because most of this, as you can imagine, the trees are blown down or snapped off, and almost nothing left standing intact from wind speeds that probably were sustained at 70 to 80 miles an hour, and wind gusts that were probably in excess of 100 miles an hour within that. The storm had a couple of damage swaths, as you can see in the text there. The long one here that was about 25 miles long was the initial onset of total destruction. Again, there was lots of destruction around this, but total destruction. And then the storm collected additional wind speed that moved in from the southwest to the northeast across this track, right up here to where we are at Chik-Wauk, and then another one a little further on down the length of the trail here. So you had this incredible path length of almost 60 miles along the international border, with incredible damage. This is the radar. This is a radar loop. This is going to go back and forth, but this is from the Duluth radar. So you can see that the storm has organized itself, and then it clearly bows out as it approaches Ely, and then moves on across our region here. And that bow that you see there, that is the radar signature of incredibly strong winds. So that's what meteorologists look for putting warnings together. Now, the other thing to note here is that this is this range ring here, this is 250 miles across this. So this storm is moving about 250 miles in the space of 4 hours. So it's moving at 60 miles an hour, the entire complex is. And then you've got these incredibly strong winds on top of it. And it's sustaining itself. This is the other really unusual thing about a derecho. These storms typically, they run themselves right out of the prime conditions that are required to support thunderstorm growth and development. This one didn't. It just continued to intensify and continued to move along. So, this is 2 p.m. It's basically moved out of the arrowhead at this point. If you go to the next slide. This was the map that the National Forest Service put out on the destruction of the forest here in this area. The red, anywhere from 67 to 100% destruction of the trees in the forest. 1/3 to 2/3 in the orange and the yellow. So you can see these different damage areas as those stronger winds came in those two areas, while the main storm started way out west of Ely. So we're way out, Ely is here, so way out west here, and came straight across. What did that look like? Well, it's pretty incredible, I'm sure we'll hear some stories, hopefully, from people who actually lived through it. These will look all too familiar. The forest itself was just completely destroyed. Those winds, like I say, this area obviously is largely uninhabited, so a lot of the wind speeds we have are estimated based on how big the trees were that were snapped off. But 75 to 105 miles an hour is certainly well within reason. Almost 500,000 acres of forest were just completely destroyed. So in the 2 million acres of the Superior National Forest, a quarter of it was totally destroyed by this single storm. Most amazingly, there were 20 people that were airlifted, but no one was killed, which is, given the severity of the storm, unbelievable. Well, it was in these phases of the storm. This is a 380-mile path from west of Fargo until it was through Grand Portage in 6 hours. It's really astonishing how quickly this moved. So, we'll hear more about the after effects. I thought this map was, well, first of all, the picture on the bottom is a picture of a portage. And somebody's been in here actually clearing some of this and moving it out of the way. But, this is what people who went in to get people out of the BWCAW after the blowdown had to contend with. And you can see the rafting of the trees. When these trees are faced with winds like this, they get, sometimes the trees on the shoreline would actually just be blown over. They uproot, the roots would pull up you could see if you paddled in a few years later, you could still see bright white shorelines from the rocks that were embedded in the rip walls on the shoreline of these trees that had blown down. But once you got away from the lakeshore, they'd either blow over or snap off 10 or 15 feet up and just lie down on top of other trees. And so the trees were rafted up off the ground. And as a consequence, over the next few years, those trees would dry out, but they wouldn't rot because they were up off the ground. And so you had a tremendous amount of fuel that was created for potential fires. And the orange areas here are the primary areas of blowdown where there was, virtual complete blowdown. And then the red area is the outline of the Cavity Lake Fire, which Cavity Lake Fire was 2005? 2006. And then the Ham Lake Fire, which we're all familiar with here, of course, was the black. And it actually burned, of course, well into Canada and then came back down across the trail here in 2007. So, one of the direct consequences, of course, of this kind of damage is the fire danger was just off the charts. And of course, we're still hearing about and worried about fire even here 22 years later, 21 years later, from fire getting out into these blowdown areas where there's still all this fuel available. Obviously we had big transportation problems. Also, I want to mention, I'm sure we'll hear about this from some of the witnesses, how long it took to get power back. Virtually all of the electrical infrastructure was destroyed along the trail, the supply lines. It took a long time to get electrical power back. You go to the next slide. But this derecho didn't end when this storm finished with the BWCA, even though it's known as the BWCA blowdown. This is, by the way, spoiler alert, this is a surprise ending, I suppose. So, this storm traveled across Lake Superior. Over the night of July 4th into July 5th, it traveled across Ontario, all the way across central and eastern Ontario, southern Quebec, and actually came back into the United States, into upstate Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, where it continued to cause damage until it blew out to sea. Last slide, next slide. And in fact, this storm came out to sea, was clearly identified, even though there's no islands or anything out here, it was clearly identifiable on satellite as it traveled around a large high-pressure ridge that was sitting off of the east coast, all the way around it, came back on shore on July 6th in South Carolina, and immediately regained its wind potential, not to the extent, not quite to the wind speeds that we saw, but that we saw here, but it still had 60 to 80 mile-an-hour winds as it traveled all the way down into Louisiana and finally dissipated in the Gulf of Mexico. 6,000 mile track. So one of the really unique things about this storm, this is by far and away the longest track derecho, and virtually one of the longest track thunderstorms that we can clearly identify ever observed or recorded. And in terms of the damage that this whole complex caused, it's also one of the most expensive. But because it occurred in multiple pieces over multiple days, nobody really put it together until a few years later. So, it was really an extraordinary event in many respects. And so from a meteorological point of view, it's the path length, it's the intensity and severity of the winds while it was here, and how quickly it evolved from a loosely organized MCS into this incredibly destructive derecho. Those are the onsets. Those are the surprises for us. Now, the one other thing I would say is that this is also the most northerly track of a derecho that is as far as we know, that we've ever observed here in the United States or here in North America. There have been, derechos are not all that uncommon. Typically, we might see one a year. There was one earlier this summer in Wisconsin that started up here in northwestern Wisconsin and ended up tracking all the way down through Indiana and into Ohio. But one a year is typically most. Of course, a year ago, you probably heard about the derecho that started out here in northwestern Nebraska and did all the destruction across Iowa and Illinois and Indiana. So they're not unknown, but they are unusual. And that is my presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yeah.
What pushed it back from being out in the Atlantic back to land?
Back. So it got caught, it's all being steered by these high-level winds up at 30,000 feet, what we call a jet stream. So that's what pushed it out this way. Once it got out over the Atlantic, it actually got caught up in the subtropical jet stream that actually comes the other way. This is what the current that drives hurricanes in the summer and the fall back this way, this direction, around the Bermuda High. The Bermuda's out here. So it's all the upper level winds. That's the short answer that pushed it back into the U.S.
So like over the years, FAA and airline industries have gotten really good at predicting the downdrafts. Has that related into predicting this type of weather pattern, or just in general being able to have a better idea that this one does have the potential to be damaging or long-lived? I know that they're two different things, very short compared to something that can last for days.
It's the duration and intensity. I might tap on my neighbor JT here for his point of view as a pilot. The downbursts, the microbursts that cause wind shear incidents for aircraft are typically very small and they're very short-lived. So airports have what are called low-level wind shear alert systems to detect that shift in winds and try to alert aircraft to a loss of speed on final, because what happens is they fly into one of these downbursts and they lose airspeed. JT, anything to add on that?
About downbursts?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically downbursts is just the cold air rushing down to the ground, and we have a normal headwind, we usually try to manage the wind. So you might have, and then there's thunderstorms, the ones usually 20, 30 knots gusty. But if the storm's like behind you or right above you, you get a downburst, it pushes that wind the opposite way. And a relative airspeed changes because of the extreme shift in the wind from maybe a 20, 30 knot headwind to 20, 30 knot tailwind, so that's a loss of 60 knots, 40 to 60 knots. And you're going slow, all those estimates always happen down low.
So the big difference though is that that's very small and very short-lived. Obviously this is large and long-lived, but I have to be honest with you, predicting one of the development of a derecho before it actually evolves into this is not not very good. You won't see derecho alerts or anything like derecho alerts because it just takes so many things to come together just perfectly to create this storm and to create it so that it can sustain itself that long with that scale. So, yeah.
I grew up in Kansas, so I grew up with tornadoes. And just the whole evolution of, being able to predict. And I mean, now they can tell you days in advance, be ready Friday and the storm's coming. And they're pretty accurate nowadays, so.
They are, and you would certainly hear about, the conditions for something like this would be the same as the conditions for that, you'll know that there's potential for severe weather, or whether it would be something like this. Any other questions? If not, I'd like to ask, well, go ahead.
We had, I believe it was a straight line wind that maybe 5 or 6 years ago that came across through Clove Lake, Duncan Daniels, and took out, you can see it pretty easily from the snapped off, large white pines, maybe 10 to 20 feet up, or even, and just this whole path that just went through very quickly in one night. Is that the same kind of phenomena, or is it something?
Similar, but probably not, it doesn't, again, to be called a derecho, it has to have this extremely long damage path of 250 miles. Straight line winds can come from a single intense thunderstorm cell that develops this strong downdraft and sustains itself and creates those that strong wind gust. There was a professor, Ted Fujita, at the University of Chicago in the 1970s and early 80s that did a study on, took a unique look at weather and severe weather, because he would go up and fly reconnaissance after the storms and map out the damage and map out what direction the winds were blowing. And he was the one that first identified straight line winds and differentiated them from tornadoes and other kinds of damage, because he could identify that longer path length. And incidentally, he was also instrumental in developing the theory of these downbursts that created wind shear problems for aircraft. So it's very possible that was associated with a single thunderstorm. It might have had a path length of 10 or 15 miles, but then those will typically blow themselves out. Again, typical life of an individual thunderstorm cell is 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. They can perpetuate themselves by developing new cells and persist for several hours, but typically that's it. Yeah.
Did this also have impact on the mariners, particularly on Lake Superior? And did they have any warning?
Well, by the time, great question. Yes, they would have seen these same winds on the northern part of Lake Superior. By the time it hit Lake Superior, this was not a secret anymore. There were warnings posted, the Canadians had posted warnings across all of the northern part of Lake Superior for this storm, because they knew what was coming.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear from some of the people who are here and lived through it. If someone is willing to tell their story. Bonnie?
Well, I'll speak up first. I know there's more that have been here on July 4th, 1999. I actually worked up at Voyager Canoe Outfitters at that time. And my husband and I purchased land down the trail near Tucker Lake, Loon Lake area. And so we were, it's just nice wooded property and at the time. We were working up at Voyager Canoe Outfitters, and I remember being downstairs in the main outfitting lodge room, and we had just recently heard on the radio that there was a storm coming. And then all of a sudden, it was like they say, that green dark cloud. We could see that coming. And then all of a sudden, the rain was coming through the door horizontal. And we could see the Kellar canoes flipping in the wind. And my husband actually ran out to try to, and Mike and Sue were like, get back in here. And we all kind of got into like one little area of the lodge, because we didn't know. We thought it was maybe a tornado or something that was coming through. And it didn't last long. 20 minutes, I think I remember right. And just all the trees that were down around Voyager, and our only vehicle was parked down in the main parking lot down at the mainstay public parking lot over there. And my husband went down there to look, and here there was a huge white pine that went over 3 vehicles, and one of them was our vehicle. So we lost our vehicle there. And then I remember the owner, Sue Prom, she was trying to get word out to her family, and so she started driving, and she couldn't believe she'd have to turn around and come back, because she could not drive down the Gunflint Trail. It was just littered with trees and everything. I think she got behind the ambulance where the people were cutting the road clear, and she did get to town so she could call our family members that we were okay, and they had no idea what she was talking about. We did get to our land, and actually July 5th, we were supposed to have the well drillers come and put a well into our property, and there was nothing left. All our trees were down. We had to have a logger come in, and it was so funny because when we did finally build, people were like, "Oh, we can see your house," you know, because of course all the trees were down. And then slowly and slowly, we planted a whole bunch of trees, so now you can't even see our home anymore. So, but it was, and I heard stories from people that worked at Gunflint, where they had said, Gunflint Lodge, that they had said the water level had, on the, you know, the west end of the lake where Gunflint Lodge was, had dropped because the winds had pushed all that water, and on the east end, the water level was really high. And I know Terry and Mike Kaiser are here, and they probably can attest to that too.
We ourselves are out here, my brother Mike and a friend are here, and they were on Saginaw Lake. And the wind started up and they knew something bad was coming. So they beelined in their boat to an island beside it and took refuge under the huge rock. And then they get back to our place. We have a cabin up on Cross River, by Cross River, and they somehow were able to get back to the cabin. I don't know how. On the chainsaws. But they could not get into the road from the highway to our cabin, so they just spent the day, you know, clearing the road so they could get in. But my brother said it was really just, outside was just spooky and just like that.
And I forgot to add, we were without power for 2 weeks.
Well, we were on Hungry Jack Lake in the cabin that my parents built in the 50s on vacation when our kids were teenagers. Our daughter had a friend with her, 16-year-olds. And it was really, really hot that morning. And we were all out on the lake by 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning because it was just so hot. Little stick cabin that my parents built. And we were playing, and all of a sudden I looked to the west, and I said, "You guys, I just saw lightning out in the sky, so we should go inside." And I remember looking at the clock, and it's like, "Oh, it's like 11:30. I'll just get lunch ready. It's about time for lunch." And at 11:45, all hell broke loose. You know, the storm kept getting worse and worse, and we just watched the wind going, and we have a ramp dock. And there were 2 boats on it, and we watched them blow off, and one went that way and the other went that way. And then we just started seeing the trees snapping, and just didn't know what was going to happen. And it was like 15 minutes or less. It was almost like by noon it was over. And the first thing, Bonnie, it's so funny you said that, the first thing I decided to do was call my mom and let her know we were okay. And I literally did call my mom and let her know we were okay, and she was like, "Okay." And then we went outside and saw all of these trees snapped all over the road behind us, and the phone line laying there on the ground. So that was like the miracle. I was like, "Really? I got to call my mom?" I tell that story to other people, they can't believe it, that nobody had phone service anywhere around there. So it was the 4th of July, and a young couple came walking up to our cabin, and he was dating her, showing her around because he'd been up there as a kid, and they rode it out in their car up on the on South Hungry Jack Road a little ways. So they joined in, other people joined in. Dave, Nancy Seaton got a crew organized with chainsaws, and we got organized with water, and a pickup truck, and there were probably about 15 of us that just got to work clearing trees. So probably about a 2-mile road just to get to Hungry Jack Road. And we worked until about 6 o'clock that night and got out to Hungry Jack Road, you know, only to realize we couldn't get any farther. And then, this is just an odd thing. Our neighbors actually were up on Duncan Lake, and they rode that out underneath their aluminum canoe. And then was able to make it back, but their portages were over trees, portages to get to them from the jack. And then that night it was a torrential rainstorm. I just remember not being able to sleep all night, but I thought, great, we didn't blow away or get killed by a tree. Now it's gonna take the cabin right into the lake. It just felt like we had a torrential rain going underneath us. And then, yeah, I literally did the phone line up by Northwestern. I don't know if that phone is still there.
It's
Yeah,
still there.
public.
Okay, that phone was working, so we could go there. Yeah.
Yeah, only buried line at Mid-Trail, we'd stand in line for hours to make your phone call.
Yeah.
There'd be dozens of people lined up, and we'd just sit in line, and stand there, and everyone was pretty cool, 5 or 10 minutes,
And our other kids were coming up that day from the Twin Cities, so we called to let them know not to come up. And once again, they said, "What storm are you talking about?" So it's like they didn't know. So anyway, I don't know about electricity because we decided to back up and go.
As soon as we could.
How long did it take to get out?
Yeah. You know, they were making their way up. This was the other little side story that it can only happen on the November train. So we make it to the road, and here comes a father and a son in their car, like from the Ben Flint Trail. And we were like, how did you make it up here? And they were following emergency trucks, clearing the Ben Flint Trail. And they were customers of Hungry Jack Outfitters. And by gosh, by golly, they were doing a father-son trip, and there was nothing that was going to stop them. So they were, seriously, Dave Seat was right there, and they, oh, you're, Bob and Steve, whatever their names were. Oh. And he said, your trip is canceled. But yeah.
I did hear Dave Tuttle, who was owned and ran, Dave and Barb Tuttle owned and ran East Bearskin Lodge at that time. And Dave got a call from his good friend Mike Landy up here on Seagull Lake. They owned a seaplane, a float plane together, and it was parked at Bearskin, out on the lake in Little Bay at Bearskin. And Mike called him and said, and said, Dave, we had a little bit of wind up here. You might want to put an extra rope on the plane. So Dave walked from the lodge around the bay and put a couple of tie downs on the plane, and he was just walking back, and he got a look at the sky, which had turned completely green. He thought, well, maybe I should trot. And he was literally on the back road, and all of a sudden the wind hit, and he was dodging falling trees. And he managed to make it to his maintenance shop, right?
I think so.
Maintenance shop, and to ride the storm out. And he got out and had to climb over several trees just to get back to the lodge, and he thought, oh my God, this is horrible. There's no power, nothing. And just like you, just by chance, he picked up the phone, not expecting to hear anything, and got a dial tone. Because it was all landline still at that point.
Wow.
And so his first call was to the Caterpillar dealer in Duluth. I want the biggest generator you've got. I've got a freezer full of food. So, yeah, I mean, the phone, I've heard several people say that the actual landline phone continued to work. Remarkably. Yeah.
Yeah, we're on the summer homes on Dunflint, so at the far
Sure.
west end of Dunflint. And you can't, there's a rise to the left, so you don't see storms coming from the west. And it was a hot, muggy day. We were there. It was the only 4th of July we had not spent in our hometown. So we now always spend 4th of July. The storm just came up just totally suddenly, and we stayed near the fireplace and looking out the plate glass window, and we could see the trees just going back and forth and falling over and hearing trees, getting puncture the roof. And what I remember was walking out afterwards, it was like the Wizard of Oz. You know, it was absolutely silent. All the birds, the animals, everything was silent. And then off in the distance, you heard a chainsaw. So,
I might add to that, I was there with our family and you described it well, all those trees snapped off. And we still have a lot of stumps today that are, just uprooted out of the ground and leaning, I guess, towards the east. And the other thing I've learned to this day, I never leave my chainsaw with a dull chain. To this day, it is always ready to go. I either put on new chain or I make sure it's sharpened, because I remember it wasn't cutting very well that day. And, everybody wanted to do something fast,
Sure.
But it was, we lost hundreds of trees, I think.
I was gonna also add that when, after the storm, or before the storm, in years before, the trees on the road from Gunfoot Trail up County Road 46 to Cross River were like canopied and just beautiful. And then after that, I mentioned to my husband this year, the trees are starting to kind of started to do that now. It has taken this long. And I was wondering if you had ever heard any stories of anybody that was out in BWCAW camping and didn't know this was coming. I can't even imagine that. We're out in a canoe.
I have read several firsthand accounts of people that were out on the lake and actually had to be rescued. And it was the same thing. One story that sticks in my mind is a husband and wife who were paddling, I believe it was on Seagull, and were at the far western end and had just gotten out and were out paddling up the lake, and she looked behind her and saw this green cloud that you described, and we've got to get to shore. So they immediately paddled over to the main shoreline where there really wasn't any, there was no portage or anything. So they just scrambled, pulled the canoe up onto the rocks just as the wind started to blow, and she got under one of the bigger trees, whereupon when the wind hit, that tree just got blown over completely and pushed over it, and she was trapped. Her legs were pinned. And the canoe, the tree hit the canoe and just squashed it. And so some other people came by after the wind died down, and they were able to get word up to one of the outfitters. Canoeing, it turned out, wasn't bad after the wind died down. It wasn't like trying to ride on the road. And so they were able to get help and get somebody back in there. And I'm not sure exactly how they freed her, but she ended up being okay. She was pinned, but not, her legs weren't crushed or anything. She was just stuck. But yeah, I did see one other remark. I think it was from someone, perhaps on Knife Lake or a little further west into the BWCA, who described that same black-green cloud. And they said it was instant panic. Oh my God, we can't be on the water if that thing hits us, because it was moving so fast. It went from sunshine to the clouds, and oh my gosh, here comes this ugly storm, and get off.
Yeah, that's what happened to my brother and his friend on Saturday, and they just saw this ugly cloud coming, and they just like said, beelined it to the nearest island. And I don't even know if there was a cabin on it or not, but they found a good rock to get behind and we're sheltered.
Growing up in Kansas, that green, the storm approaching, it traditionally looked like what I was taught as a child, it's a tornado. It's a front, and you get out of the way of that. Anna just pulled the turkey out of the oven. Our view is facing west, southwest. looked at my uncle and I said, do we have naders up here? Because that's what we jokingly call them in Kansas. He's like, no, but that's not gonna be good. About that time it broke loose and, yeah. Took 15 minutes, it was over. Forrest Parsons from Hungry Jack came running up. There was a gentleman that was pinned on Hungry Jack Road, one of their guests. And so he came to see if our phone worked, it didn't. We started cutting down to him in the same crew sheet, describing 15, 20 people in the seatings. We got that, we took the tailgate off my uncle's truck and the volunteer EMS already made it to him. Got him on there and then some of the rest of you guys went towards Hungry Jack and the rest of us turned around and went back to the Gunflint Trail part of it, and we started cutting down the Gunflint Trail, and we got down to like Bearskin, somewhere around in there, Oconto, somewhere around in there, and that's where we met they literally had just brought the road grader up from town, and these guys were just cutting like whole sections in the road grader, just push it to the side. So we met the ambulance there, and turned around, went back to the house. It started to rain like that evening, you guys were right, like 6 or 7, it finally got cold, I didn't remember how hot it was, and it finally got cold. But we went up to Norwestern to check on the Brants because they're good family friends of ours. And she gave us like 3 boxes of ice cream bars. Power went out. And so we sat around for like 20 minutes and I probably ate 4. Yeah, I'm good. Just not messing as fast as you could.
He says, "No, no."
Oh, and then they knew the fridge was going out. Like that was all the good food was gone. Eat the ice cream now. And yeah, 18 days without power. And the mind, there's something as a kid, I was in college by then that like you knew the power didn't work, but you still hit light switches. Every time you walk in the building, you try to hit it. It's like, God, it's been gone on day 12 and I'm still hitting light switches. We'd wake up at night and joke like, could someone spin the ceiling fan around a little bit, like stand there and move it. It was so hot after a couple of days later it got warm again. But yeah, that was the color of that storm could tell you how intense it was going to be, and it was powerful. It was pretty wild.
I can say though, the rest, it seems like almost the rest of that whole year, maybe the next year, every time we had a thunderstorm or there were high winds, it really put everybody on edge. That month up here, you just wondered, oh my gosh, is that going to happen again? And I did hear accounts from some people. I remember Jerry Carpenter was always saying that how depressing it was after the windstorm because some of your landmarks that you were so used to seeing were gone.
Sure.
And I remember that too, that yeah, a lot of people, it kind of depressed them after that the forest that they saw, that they had so used to, was gone.
And wasn't it a year later, like on the next 4th of July, we had what I coined, I'm sure it's meteorologically correct, is the blow up. Because there were strong winds again, and it's like it blew up all the trees along the shore. You know, you're talking about the roots and the white rock.
Pushed them all back on the shore.
Yeah, the trees went again, but they came up from the shore.
Probably the next,
It blew up.
yeah, high wind, just a high wind event that
I swear to God, it's
harvested
July
all
next year.
It was weird to watch those trees settle over the years too, because some of them with those root structures, and they just kind of dangle, and you go walk trails, and some of them get back and be okay, some of them are standing and dead, but yeah, there's a lot of trees that were just weird angles.
Why does the museum have that book, Jim Court's?
It's actually in here, it's in the Nature Center, yeah, we do have some information on the windstorm and everything in here as well. Yep.
The accounts of all kinds of people.
Yeah. Yes,
We're in Clearwater, and we were not here at the time, and at that time, we were on the way up, we were leaving the following day to come up here. And my neighbor, who we really didn't have a relationship at that point, somehow made it out to Mid-Trail, that same telephone, and called us and said, well, you got some damage. And I said, what's the damage? So we lost part of this roof. I said, oh no. You lost this roof. Oh no. Your deck is gone. And he said, I think your sailboat's destroyed, and then I got really depressed. But there just seemed to be such a community effort, because he immediately offered to put tarps up and do whatever is necessary, and that seemed to be the spirit up and down the entire trail. And I told my wife, we're leaving right now from Minnesota, and she said, over my dead body. They don't need any help at this minute. She said the same thing with the Hamlet fire, so they're going to get in there anyway.
The camaraderie was pretty wild now that I think about it though too. It was a long, stressful week,
It's certainly a
If we're
common
telling-
theme up there.
If we're telling anecdotal stories, this young couple that I said walked in because they wrote it out in their car and he was up showing her around, dating her. They since got married and we are still in touch with them. They come up to visit all the time. Yeah, and your kids are now teenagers. Yeah.
We went back to the cities, for work after the 4th, and it was almost a week, felt like, before there was any coverage of it. And you would say to people, you know, I've just been through this thing, and, like your phone call, yeah, thanks for telling us. I mean, it was really, even the news was up here and not down there at all.
You know, that's interesting, because Renee and I were not here for that event.
We were supposed to be.
We were supposed to be. We had been coming up over the 4th of July and staying for a week at Bearskin every year. But in 1999, I got a better offer from my cousins in Eastern Ontario, and we went there instead. Came back, I think it was 2 days after maybe the 6th of July, and I turned on the local news in Minneapolis, and I'm seeing these pictures from the trail of this incredible destruction. And then they're shooting, I'm seeing pictures from Bearskin Lodge. In fact, I'm seeing a picture of a car squashed in what I recognize as the parking spot for cabin 6 where we were supposed to be. Oh man, I missed it. Hey everybody, thank you so much.
Good job, honey.
Yeah. Do you want a copy of it on?
Yeah, we were gonna do a new project up here, so there's a bunch of families. We actually live in Woodbury, we've been here for 15 years now, yeah, but we've been caretaking for houses. We've been having our own models, and I have to get the food and stay there, and something.
Thanks for your very comprehensive.
Don't worry,
I don't think so, but I know that's where this whole world, I mean,